The Legend of Stalvan Mistmantle. Ah, Duskwood, that charming little corner of Azeroth where hope goes to take a nap and never quite wakes up again. If you've ever wandered there, perhaps as a bright-eyed adventurer from Stormwind, still smelling faintly of linen bandages and optimism, you probably remember the feeling. The trees grow just a little too close together. The fog seems to follow you home. And the locals, well, they look at you as if you've already been buried once. But don't worry, you're safe here. You're warm, you're in your bed, or perhaps in your hammock, or sprawled out on your gaming chair pretending it's a bed. Wherever you are, just close your eyes, because tonight we'll drift together into the tale of the Legend of Stalvan, a story so old that even the spiders in Duskwood roll their many eyes when someone brings it up. Now, for those unfamiliar, the Legend of Stalvan isn't just a bedtime story whispered to frighten little Stormwind children into finishing their vegetables. It's a real tale, recorded in tattered letters and whispered by innkeepers who really should have retired years ago. But before we get to the ghastly bits, and oh, there will be ghastly bits, let's start with Duskwood itself. Once upon a time, this place was called Brightwood. Yes, truly. Imagine it. Sunny groves, happy farmers, birds that sang instead of screamed. But that was before the cataclysm, before the scourge, before someone decided necromancy was a fun hobby. Now the land lies under a permanent twilight, like a place that's forgotten whether it's night or day. The trees hang heavy, draped in moss like old, tired curtains. Even the moonlight seems hesitant, as though it's peeking through the canopy, wondering if it should be here at all. And in the middle of it all sits Darkshire, formerly Brightwood Town, a cluster of flickering lamps and worried faces, where everyone pretends not to notice the scratching sounds at night. It's here that our story begins. At the Scarlet Raven Inn, one of the few places in Duskwood where the ale's strong enough to make you forget the screams in the forest, an innkeeper named Tavern Keep Smits leans over the counter. He's polishing a mug that's probably older than you are, and he says, in that way people do when they're dying for someone to ask, "You ever hear of the Legend of Stalvan, friend?" And you, of course, nod politely, because you've been in this situation before. You know how it goes. You nod, you sip, and the tale begins to unwind, like a particularly haunted ball of yarn. Long ago, says Smits, before Duskwood was cursed, before even the Worgen roamed the wilds, there was a man named Stalvan Mistmantle, a scholar, a gentleman, a man of education and refinement. You take a sip of whatever passes for ale in this town, it tastes faintly of despair and maybe apples. And listen. Stalvan, the innkeeper, goes on, came from Silverpine Forest, a tutor by trade. He traveled from place to place, teaching the sons and daughters of noble houses. Bright future, good manners, and a mind sharper than a gnome's screwdriver. So far, so good. But as with all men who wander, Stalvan was restless. And restlessness in a land like Azeroth usually leads to trouble, or at least to Duskwood. Rumor has it he'd been hired by a wealthy, noble family somewhere near Moonbrook, back when Westfall still had mansions instead of murlocs. But something happened there. No one's quite sure what. Some say a scandal. Others whisper of forbidden love. Whatever it was, Stalvan left in a hurry. Bags packed, papers flying, letters half burned in the hearth. And as fate, or perhaps something darker, would have it, he came to Duskwood. At that time, Duskwood was still recovering from being Duskwood. The undead hadn't yet started their midnight jogs through the cemetery, but the gloom had already begun to settle in. There were still farmers in the outskirts, a schoolhouse in the valley, and a few brave souls who believed in keeping the lamp oil topped up. Stalvan arrived one chilly evening, cloak damp with rain, carrying nothing but a stack of books, a quill case, and a face that suggested he was already halfway haunted. He checked into the Scarlet Raven, of course, probably in the same room where you're staying tonight, though. Don't let that worry you. He introduced himself politely. "Stalvan Mistmantle," he said, and for a few weeks all seemed well. He'd sit by the fire, reading late into the night. Sometimes he'd scribble in his journal, muttering to himself in that charmingly academic way people do when they're plotting something dreadful, but still grammatically correct. But soon, whispers began, the kind that cling to a town like fog. A young girl, the daughter of a local noble, had become quite taken with him. Her name was Tiloa, though some say Tiloa Harrington, and others call her the young lady of the manor. The details differ depending on who's drunk and how much. She was bright, gentle, and, most importantly, 16. Stalvan, being a grown man and allegedly wise, should have known better. But love, as the poets say, is blind. And sometimes, in Duskwood, it's also a little bit cursed. For now, though, the tale remains peaceful. The fire crackles. The innkeeper lowers his voice, eyes flicking toward the window as though afraid something might be listening out in the mist. "They say," he murmurs, "that on certain nights, if you listen close, you can still hear his quill scratching, right upstairs, writing letters that never got sent." And just then, as if on cue, a faint scratching sound echoes from above. But don't worry, it's just the wind. It's always the wind. When last we left our gloomy hero, Stalvan Mistmantle, he'd just arrived in Duskwood, back when the village still tried to convince itself it wasn't haunted. He'd come seeking peace, purpose, and perhaps a little anonymity after a mysterious departure from his last tutoring job out west. Now, Duskwood isn't exactly known for welcoming strangers. It's not that the people are rude, it's just that when you live in a place where half your neighbors are zombies, you learn to be selective about who you let in. Still, Stalvan's manners, eloquence, and slightly tragic aura made an impression. He was charming in that deeply literary way that makes you think he probably carries poetry in his pockets instead of lint. He introduced himself to the locals, the mayor, the innkeeper, even the town's old scholar, and soon, word spread to Lord and Lady Everett, a minor noble couple who lived just outside town. The Everetts had a daughter, Tiloa, bright and curious. Too clever, perhaps, for a place like Duskwood. She'd just turned 16 and was due for proper tutoring. Literature, etiquette, the usual noble nonsense. And so, fate, or perhaps irony, placed Stalvan right where destiny could find him. The first of his letters begins plainly enough. "To my dear brother in Silverpine," it reads, "I have found employment at last. The family here is of decent stock, though the town itself seems perpetually dim. The mists hang heavy even at noon. I confess it unsettles me. but I am resolved to do good work here. The young lady, Tiloa, is sharp and inquisitive, a delight to teach. It's a normal enough start. No madness yet, no ominous phrasing, not even a hint of Gothic foreshadowing. That would come later. In the weeks that followed, Stalvan became a fixture at the Everett estate. He'd arrive each morning, books under his arm, and leave by lantern light. The servants whispered about how much the young lady smiled around him, how she lingered over her lessons, how her laughter, once bright and childish, had taken on that delicate, secretive tone known only to the newly infatuated. And Stalvan, well, he wrote again to his brother. It is rare, I think, to meet such purity of mind. Tiloa possesses an eagerness to learn that I have not seen since my own youth. I find myself uplifted in her company. She reminds me that innocence still exists in this world, even here among the shadows. A touching sentiment, though one that sounds a little too wistful for comfort. Weeks turned into months, lessons turned into walks through the garden, discussions about poetry and philosophy that stretched into twilight. Lady Everett began to notice, so did the servants. But Stalvan was respected, and Tiloa was, in the eyes of her parents, still their little girl. No one imagined, or wanted to imagine, anything untoward. Until one evening, a messenger arrived from the north, a young man dressed in fine armor, bearing a crest unfamiliar to the townsfolk. His name was Lord Marrow, son of a neighboring noble house, handsome, confident, and utterly sure that the world would bend to his will. He'd come to court Tiloa. Now, you can imagine what that did to our dear scholar. He'd built, quietly and politely, a little world in his mind, one where intellect triumphed over status, where love was measured by sonnets instead of land deeds. And here comes Lord Marrow, with his shining armor and perfect hair, ready to ruin everything with a single horse ride and an engagement ring. In his next letter, Stalvan's tone changes. My brother, I confess that my heart is troubled. The young lady has found herself courted by a noble fop of shallow wit. I cannot abide the thought that her brilliance should be wasted on such a man. Yet I am but her tutor, a servant. Still, when she looks at me, I think perhaps she feels it too. The heart cannot always be governed by rank. Ah, yes, that's the line right there. The moment where logic packs its bags and emotion takes the wheel. According to the townsfolk, Stalvan grew increasingly strange. He'd wander the woods at night, muttering to himself, reciting fragments of poetry. His lessons with Tiloa became intense, long, impassioned conversations about destiny, freedom, the soul. And though Tiloa was flattered, perhaps even curious, she began to sense the edge of something darker beneath his affection. Then came the harvest festival. The Everetts threw a grand celebration, as noble families do when they want to pretend the world isn't falling apart around them. Lanterns lit the paths, music filled the air, and the townsfolk danced in the courtyard while pretending not to notice the crows circling overhead. Tiloa attended, radiant in a gown of deep green. Lord Marrow was there too, of course, preening like a rooster. And Stalvan, poor Stalvan, stood off to the side, wine-glass trembling in hand, eyes fixed on her as if she were the last light in all of Duskwood. Someone saw him later that night, alone near the stables, clutching a torn letter and whispering her name. When asked about it the next morning, he merely smiled, a calm, too wide smile, and said, "Love is the truest education," which, you have to admit, sounds both poetic and deeply alarming. In the weeks after the festival, everything began to unravel. Tiloa grew distant, uneasy. Her parents, perhaps finally realizing what had been brewing, dismissed Stalvan, politely, of course. They paid him his due and suggested he find work elsewhere. He thanked them graciously, packed his things, and left the Everett estate. But he didn't go far. He moved instead to a small cottage at the edge of town, a lonely, ivy-covered house overlooking the woods. There, he continued to write letters to his brother, to himself, and most of all, to Tiloa. One such letter, never sent, was later found among his belongings. It reads, "Dearest Tiloa, you say your heart belongs to another. I do not believe it. You are too wise, too pure, to be deceived by empty titles and polished armor. The world may conspire against us, but love such as ours cannot be denied. I shall come for you soon, and then you will see. I will make you understand." A week later, tragedy struck. The Everett's estate was found in ruins, the servants dead, the parents slain, and Tiloa, poor Tiloa, her name whispered like a curse. No one knew the full story. The guards who arrived found the door smashed in, furniture overturned, and blood everywhere. But of Stalvan, there was no sign, only a trail of letters, torn and spattered, leading toward the woods. Thunder rumbles softly. The narrator's tone grows slow and measured. The townsfolk buried the dead and spoke little of it after. Duskwood is not a place that dwells on horror. It simply adds it to the landscape and moves on. Yet sometimes, at night, travelers swore they saw a figure wandering among the graves, a man in a torn cloak, holding a lantern, whispering a girl's name over and over again. Stalvan Mistmantle, the tutor who loved too deeply, the scholar who lost his mind, the ghost who couldn't forget. Now I know what you're thinking. Ah, tragic. Yes, but surely that's the end of it. Oh, my sweet summer adventurer, you've clearly never quested in Duskwood, because in Duskwood, no one ever just dies. They linger, they write letters, and sometimes they wait for you. Back in the present, the innkeeper sighs, refilling your mug. "That's how it happened," he says, or so they say, but you know how stories grow in the telling. You nod, pretending you're not slightly terrified, and then he leans closer. "But if you're curious, and I see that look in your eye, maybe you should talk to Clerk Daltrey over at Town Hall. He keeps the old records, the official ones." The innkeeper pauses, lowering his voice. "Though if you ask me, some things are better left unread." You thank him, step outside, and breathe in the cold Duskwood air. The mist curls around your boots. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howls, or maybe it's something worse. The lanterns flicker. The road ahead winds through the trees toward the old town hall. You adjust your pack, mutter something brave that sounds suspiciously like, "Why am I doing this?" and start walking. Because this is Duskwood, and curiosity here is both a torch and a curse. The town hall looms in the mist like a grumpy bureaucrat that grew a building around itself. Inside, the air smells of parchment and candle wax, the two natural scents of anyone who's ever worked in paperwork. You find Clerk Daltrey hunched over a desk, spectacles halfway down his nose, sorting through what appears to be several centuries' worth of dusty files. He looks up, startled. Oh, you're not another ghost, are you? You shake your head. He sighs in relief. Good. The last one didn't fill out the haunting form. You explain your interest in the Legend of Stalvan Mistmantle. The clerk blinks, clearly unhappy to hear the name. He glances toward a locked cabinet at the back of the room, the kind labeled "Best Left Alone" in every fantasy library. He mutters, that case again. The Legend of Stalvan. Yes, we have records. But it's not a happy tale, not one bit. In fact, the paperwork is cursed, some say. Brings bad luck, bad dreams. He studies you, a brave, foolish adventurer who's clearly going to read it anyway. Well then, he says, if you insist, take this. He hands you a sealed document, brittle, yellowed, and smelling faintly of regret. The tag reads, Mistmantle, Stalvan, Personal Records, Confidential. You carefully break the seal, and the story, quite literally, begins to write itself. The first letter. To the esteemed Council of Silverpine, it is with a weary heart that I tender my resignation as tutor to the family of Lord Hargrave of Moonbrook. The rumors surrounding my conduct are baseless, yet I find that truth is of little consequence when the tongues of the idle begin to wag. I leave this place not in shame, but in sorrow. The girl, Miss Hargrave, was bright beyond her years, but innocence is a fragile thing in a house ruled by suspicion. I go now to seek quieter employment, perhaps in the south, where a man may rebuild his good name. Yours in perseverance, Stalvan Mistmantle. You lower the parchment. So it's true. There was something before Duskwood, a scandal, a whisper, a shadow trailing him from one place to another. Clerk Daltrey clears his throat. That's the earliest record we have. After that, he traveled. Redridge, Westfall, Elwyn, a restless sort, always looking for work, always leaving in a hurry. He gestures toward another sealed letter. This one came from Moonbrook. It was found years later in an abandoned home. Read it, if you dare. The Moonbrook letter. Dearest brother, the whispers continue to follow me. I know not why. Have I not always been proper, dutiful, and kind? Yet every time I teach, there comes a point, a look, a laugh, an innocent touch of the hand, and suddenly the world turns on me. I cannot help that I inspire affection. I cannot help that I feel it in return. Perhaps the fault lies not in me, but in society, in its cruel and narrow rules. Still, I shall try again. There is a small town called Brightwood, and a family there seeks a tutor for their daughter. I shall go. You glance up at Clerk Daltrey, who grimaces. Brightwood, he says. That was before the curse. We call it Duskwood now. You both fall silent for a moment, listening to the muffled wind against the shutters. It sounds almost like breathing. Daltrey gestures nervously toward another stack of papers. Here, the next ones came from Duskwood itself, found years later by the Night Watch. Don't ask where. It's better you don't know. You pull out the next document. It's older, stained with something dark. The ink looks like it was written in haste, words slanting, growing uneven. The Duskwood Diary. October 5th. At last, I have found peace. The Everetts are kind and respectable, their daughter Tiloa a delight. She learns quickly, perhaps too quickly. I see in her the spark of genius, the same light that burns in my own soul. October 18th. Tiloa brought me a flower today. A small gesture, but meaningful. I have placed it between the pages of my book. October 22nd. Lord Everett spoke to me about maintaining proper decorum. I assured him of my honor. Still, I think he suspects. How tiresome these noblemen can be. October 31st. Tiloa looked pale today. Her mother says she's unwell, but when we were alone, she smiled at me. Ah, what a smile, enough to banish all fear. You can almost see it, the slow unraveling. A man convincing himself of purity, even as he slides toward obsession. Daltrey shuffles nervously. Be careful with that one. There's another page. You flip it over. The handwriting has changed. More erratic, uneven, the ink blotted as though written in shaking hands. November 12th. They have dismissed me. Said I was inappropriate, that I lingered too long. Fools, all of them. They cannot understand that the heart chooses its own truth. I will not be cast aside again. I will make her see. She belongs with me. November 15th. I heard she is to be wed to some arrogant child of privilege. No, I will not allow it. Love cannot be chained by law or title. November 16th. Tomorrow, I go to the manor. We will be together, Tiloa and I. I will make her understand. The last words are scrawled large and uneven, pressed so hard they've nearly torn through the parchment. Daltrey whispers, "That was the last entry." He closes the folder with shaking hands. After that, they found what was left of the Everetts. The Night Watch chased rumors for months, sightings of Stalvan, half mad, covered in blood, raving about love and destiny. He sighs. Eventually, they found his cottage empty, but they never found him. Not alive, anyway. You ask what he means. Daltrey glances toward the window, the mist pressing against the glass. They say he died out there, somewhere between the woods and his own guilt, but his spirit, he swallows hard. His spirit didn't stay buried. He pushes the folder toward you. If you want to know more, speak with Madame Eva, the fortune teller. She knows things the rest of us try to forget. In Madame Eva's tent, the air smells of incense and damp cloth. Madame Eva, the town's fortune teller, or perhaps its quiet therapist, sits cross-legged, her eyes clouded but kind. "You seek Stalvan," she murmurs, "before you even speak. Many have. Few returned at peace." She gestures to the flickering cards laid out before her. Each one bears a symbol, a heart, a dagger, a letter, and a candle. Love, death, regret, remembrance, she says. These are his story. She tilts her head, studying you as if reading your soul. Do you wish to finish what he began? To bring rest to a restless heart? You nod. Because of course you do. You're the protagonist. Madame Eva smiles faintly. Then you must gather what remains of him, his letters, his regrets. Only then can his spirit be freed. And so begins the modern quest, the hero's slow, eerie pilgrimage through Duskwood's fog-choked corners, collecting the fragments of a man who loved too deeply and fell too far. You search through crypts and cottages, through spiderwebs and sighing trees. You find old envelopes tucked behind loose bricks, torn diary pages hidden in gravestones. Every piece tells the same story, obsession disguised as devotion. And in every letter, the handwriting becomes more frantic. They will not separate us. She will see reason. They forced me to it. She screamed, but she will forgive me. She must. Until finally. Why won't she answer me? Why won't she wake up? That's the moment it hits you, the horror beneath the tragedy. He hadn't just killed the Everetts. He'd killed her too, the girl he claimed to love, and his mind, unable to bear it, broke completely. Now his spirit wanders still, not out of malice, but of madness, endlessly replaying the moment when love became possession, and possession became murder. You gather the last of his letters, place them carefully in your pack. Madame Eva meets you once more at her tent. She reads each letter aloud, her voice trembling. Then, with a deep sigh, she says, "Now we know the truth, but truth alone cannot banish sorrow. His spirit lingers still near his old home. Go there, confront him, lay him to rest." You nod. The mist seems thicker now, the air colder. Your path leads to the edge of town, to a place the locals never go. Mistmantle Manor. Duskwood doesn't have days, not really. It has lighter shades of dark, followed by darker shades of dark, followed by, if you're lucky, the faintest suggestion of moonlight pretending to be morning. And tonight, it's particularly moody. The mist is thick enough to taste, and if you've ever tasted Duskwood mist, you know it's about 40% fog, 40% regret, and 20% questionable spores. You stand at the edge of town, staring at a crooked sign barely visible through the gloom, an arrow pointing to the right, and a text that says, Mistmantle Manor. Even the arrow seems unsure, like it's quietly apologizing for existing. You start walking. Each step crunches through dead leaves that were probably alive when Anduin was still in kindergarten. The forest presses close. The air is heavy with that deep, earthy smell of damp wood and long-forgotten things. You half expect the trees themselves to start whispering, "Turn back, hero. This place has excellent Yelp reviews for hauntings." But curiosity, that reliable little fool, keeps you moving. At one point, you pass a sign nailed to a tree. "Keep out, by order of the Night Watch." Underneath, someone has scratched a smaller line. "Seriously, we mean it." The road bends and opens onto a clearing. There it stands, Mistmantle Manor. A once proud house now slumped like it's given up on architecture altogether. Its windows are cracked and fogged from within. The roof sags in the middle like a weary sigh. And yet, there's a strange dignity to it, a sad beauty. You can almost imagine what it looked like once. The polished wood, the candles in every window, laughter echoing through the halls. Now, only the wind speaks here. And something else. A faint light flickers in an upstairs window. Just one, pulsing slowly, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The door opens with a long groan that sounds suspiciously like it's saying, "You're making a mistake." Inside, the air is stale. Everything smells faintly of dust, ink, and unfinished business. The foyer is littered with books, shattered glass, and the unmistakable debris of someone who once had a lot of feelings and very poor coping mechanisms. Your lantern's light catches a painting on the wall, a portrait of Stalvan himself, He looks younger, refined, handsome in that tragic poet sort of way. The plaque beneath it reads, Stalvan Mistmantle, educator and scholar. Someone, or something, has slashed through the word educator. You step forward. A chill runs up your spine. From somewhere upstairs, you hear it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The unmistakable sound of a quill on paper. You whisper to yourself, nope, definitely just mice, or an overachieving ghost doing paperwork. And then, faintly, a voice. Tiloa? Soft, cracked, so full of longing that it freezes your blood. You climb the staircase, every board complaining loudly about your life choices. At the top of the landing, a candle burns on a small desk, impossibly, miraculously still lit after all these years. Next to it lies an open book, a diary. You reach out and read. She forgives me. I know she must. I see her face when I close my eyes. She stands by the window, smiling, always smiling. She tells me she loves me still. I only need to bring her back, to make her whole again. The ink trails off, smudged, and beside it, something moves. At first, you think it's a reflection, a trick of the light, but then the air grows colder, your breath fogging in front of you. A figure coalesces from the mist, tall, gaunt, wrapped in the tatters of what was once fine clothing. His eyes glow faintly blue, like dying embers. Stalvan Mistmantle. For a moment, he simply stares at you, the ghost of a man who once believed too much in his own story. Then he speaks. You've read them, haven't you? My letters, my life. You nod carefully. They told you lies, he says. They always tell lies. I was her teacher, her protector, her only true friend. They were jealous. They tore us apart. He takes a step forward, his voice rising, equal parts fury and heartbreak. But I found her again. She came to me. She smiled. You saw, didn't you? In the letters. She forgave me. I only wanted her back. The air grows heavy, shimmering with restless energy. You whisper softly, Stalvan, she's gone. You must let go. His face twists, rage, sorrow, confusion, all folding into one tortured expression. Gone? No, she waits for me, always waiting. I hear her in the wind, in the leaves, in the silence between words. And then he attacks, not out of malice, but desperation. It's not a battle, not really, more of a catharsis in spectral form. The walls shudder, the candles flare. The whole house seems to cry out. You draw your weapon, or perhaps your courage, and face him. Each strike you land feels wrong, like striking a memory. Each wail he releases sounds less like pain and more like confession. Finally, as your last blow lands, he falls to his knees. He looks up at you, the madness fading from his eyes, replaced by something heartbreakingly human. I remember now, her scream, her eyes. They were afraid of me. I wanted to make it right. I just wanted her to love me. He reaches out a trembling hand, which fades halfway through the gesture. Tell her, I'm sorry. And with that, the light in his eyes goes out. His form dissolves into mist, which swirls once, softly, almost gratefully, and then fades into nothing. The house exhales. The air warms by a degree. The candle on the desk flickers, then steadies. And for the first time in what feels like centuries, Mistmantle Manor is quiet. You find one final note lying where his ghost vanished. The ink is faint, the paper brittle. To any who find this, forgive me. I was a fool who mistook obsession for love, sorrow for virtue. If my spirit lingers, may it be only as a warning. There is no knowledge worth a heart's destruction, and no love worth a soul's undoing. Stalvan Mistmantle. You fold the note carefully and leave the house. Outside, the mist feels lighter somehow. Still gloomy, of course, but softer. Like the forest itself is breathing again. You take one last look back. For a moment, you could swear you see a figure standing in the window. Calm, peaceful, smiling, faintly. Then it's gone. When you return to Darkshire, the townsfolk notice. "Ah," says the innkeeper, polishing that same eternal mug. "So you went and met him, eh? Well, bless you for it. Maybe now the manor'll stay quiet." He sets a fresh mug of cider before you. "Drink up, traveler. You've earned it." And as you sip, you realize the cider tastes sweet for once. Not of dust or despair, just of apples. The tale of Stalvan Mistmantle is one of sorrow, yes, but also a reminder that love, when twisted by loneliness and fear, can turn even the brightest mind to darkness. That obsession wears the mask of devotion, and that sometimes letting go is the bravest thing a soul can do. But perhaps, in the quiet between the rustling leaves, Stalvan has finally learned that lesson. And maybe, just maybe, he's found the peace he sought for so long. And that, dear listener, is the end of the Legend of Stalvan. At least, until someone new wanders into Duskwood and decides to ask one too many questions. But for now, you're safe. The ghosts have gone to bed, and so should you. Close your eyes. Let the fog drift away. And if you hear scratching upstairs, it's just the wind. Always the wind.